Samuel's hands trembled as he wiped blood from the gym floor for the thousandth time. Not from fear, but from memories. 40 years ago, these same hands had been insured for $2 million. He was Lightning Sam, the boxer who made grown men pray they wouldn't face him in the ring. But one night, one wrong punch in a back alley fight defending his daughter, and everything vanished. Now at 68, he cleaned the same gym where his championship photo hung on the wall, faded and forgotten. Nobody recognized him. Especially not Marcus, the arrogant young champion who just announced, "Old man, you're my new punching bag tomorrow." Marcus laughed, shadow boxing near Samuel's mop bucket. But when a stranger in white robes entered the gym's dim corridor, he carried with him something impossible, a 1985 newspaper with Samuel's face on it, perfectly preserved. The Iron Temple Boxing Gym sat on the corner of 5th and Madison in downtown Philadelphia, a 3-story brick building that had witnessed 50 years of sweat, blood, and broken dreams. The paint on the exterior walls had faded from bright red to a dull rust color, and the neon sign that once read Iron Temple now flickered with only half its letters working. But inside, the gym maintained its reputation as one of the best training facilities on the East Coast. Samuel Washington arrived at 5:30 a.m. every morning, just as he had for the past 15 years. His 1997 Honda Civic rattled into the parking lot behind the gym, the engine coughing like an old man with pneumonia. He parked in the same spot every day, the one furthest from the building's entrance, the spot nobody else wanted because it meant walking through the alley where the dumpsters sat. He moved slowly these days, his 68-year-old body carrying the weight of decades and regrets. His knees ached when he climbed stairs, his back protested every time he bent down to pick up his cleaning supplies. The arthritis in his fingers made it difficult to grip the mop handle on cold mornings. But Samuel never complained. Complaining was for people who still believed their words mattered. He wore the same thing every day, dark blue work pants, a gray polo shirt with Iron Temple staff embroidered on the chest, and a pair of worn-out New Balance sneakers that he'd bought at a discount store 3 years ago. His hair had gone completely white, cut short to his scalp in a style that required no maintenance. Deep lines carved through his dark brown skin, especially around his eyes and mouth, the kind of lines that come from smiling less and worrying more over the years. The gym's back door opened with a familiar creak. Samuel flipped on the lights in the maintenance closet, a small room that smelled like bleach and old sweat. His supplies waited for him in the same arrangement he left them every night: industrial mop and bucket, spray bottles of cleaning solution, trash bags, paper towels, and a small radio that only picked up AM stations. He filled the bucket with hot water and added the pine-scented floor cleaner, watching the soap create bubbles on the surface. The steam rose and warmed his face. For a moment, just a brief moment, he allowed himself to close his eyes and remember when his hands touched different things: leather boxing gloves, championship belts, his daughter's small hand as he walked her to school. The main gym floor sprawled across 5,000 square feet of open space. 2 full-size boxing rings occupied the center, their canvas floors stained with decades of blood and sweat that no amount of cleaning could fully remove. Heavy bags hung from the ceiling in rows, each one worn smooth in different spots where countless fists had landed. Speed bags mounted on platforms along the walls, weight benches and racks clustered in one corner. The smell of the gym was distinct, a mixture of leather, sweat, metal and determination. Samuel began his morning routine, the same pattern he followed every single day. First he swept the floors, collecting the dust and debris that accumulated overnight. Then he mopped, working in careful sections, moving from the back of the gym toward the front. He cleaned the rings last, climbing through the ropes with effort, his knees protesting as he scrubbed the canvas. The walls of the Iron Temple were covered with photographs, a gallery of boxing history spanning 5 decades. Black and white photos from the 1970s showed young men with afros and determined eyes. Color photos from the 1980s and 90s captured the gym's golden era, when 3 world champions trained under this roof simultaneously. Recent photos, printed on glossy paper, showed the current generation of fighters. One photograph hung in a corner near the front desk, slightly crooked, its frame dusty. The photo showed a young man in his late 20s, his muscular body glistening with sweat, his boxing gloves raised in victory. The caption read, "Lightning Sam Washington, East Coast Heavyweight Champion 1982 to 1985. The photo had hung in that spot for 40 years, and nobody ever looked at it anymore. Certainly nobody connected that young powerful fighter with the elderly janitor who cleaned their floors. Samuel never looked at the photo either, he couldn't. Every time his eyes accidentally drifted toward that corner, he felt something twist in his chest, a physical pain that had nothing to do with his heart condition. By 6:30 a.m., other staff members started arriving. Derek, the gym's owner, pulled up in his black Mercedes SUV. He was a former middleweight contender in his 50s, his body still thick with muscle even though he'd stopped competing 20 years ago. Derek wore expensive tracksuit suits and gold chains, his success evident in every aspect of his appearance. Derek barely acknowledged Samuel as he walked past, already on his phone, already shouting about some sponsorship deal or media interview. Samuel had worked for Derek for 15 years, and in all that time, Derek had probably spoken directly to him fewer than 20 times. Samuel was furniture, invisible, just another piece of equipment that kept the gym running. The trainers arrived next: Big Tommy, who trained the heavyweight fighters; Carlos, who specialized in technique and footwork; Jennifer, one of the few female trainers in the city who worked with the younger fighters and the amateurs. They all nodded at Samuel in passing, professional courtesy, nothing more. They didn't know his story. They didn't ask. The fighters started showing up around 7 a.m. The serious ones, the professionals, the ones who treated boxing like a religion rather than a hobby. Samuel felt something rise in his chest, a familiar sensation he'd buried for 40 years. Anger. Pure, hot anger that made his hands clench into fists without conscious thought. But he forced it down. He forced everything down. Because Marcus was right. Samuel had no power here. He was 68 years old, broke, and alone. This job was all he had. 3 p.m. tomorrow, Marcus repeated, turning away. Don't be late, punching bag. His entourage laughed as they followed him toward the locker room, their voices fading as they discussed where to go for dinner. What club to hit that night, which women to call. Samuel stood frozen by the water fountain, the paper cups forgotten in his hands. The other fighters slowly returned to their training, the moment passing, already becoming just another story they might tell later. Did you see Marcus mess with that old janitor? Man, that was cold. Samuel finished his shift on autopilot. He cleaned the locker rooms, scrubbed the showers, took out the trash, locked the supply closet. His mind worked on the problem like a computer processing an impossible equation. There was no solution. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., Marcus would make good on his threat. Samuel would either have to enter that ring and let himself be beaten, or he would refuse and lose his job. Neither option was acceptable. Both options were inevitable. The gym closed at 10 p.m. Derek locked the front doors and drove away in his Mercedes without saying goodnight to anyone. The trainers left in clusters, discussing their fighters' progress, planning next week's training schedules. The last few fighters showered and departed, heading home to families, girlfriends, lives that existed beyond these walls. Samuel was always the last to leave. He made a final round through the facility, checking that everything was secure. All the lights off except the security lights, all the equipment properly stored. He found himself standing in front of that old photograph again. Lightning Sam Washington, East Coast heavyweight champion 1982 to 1985. The young man in that photo was unrecognizable, not just because of age, but because that person no longer existed. That confident, powerful fighter had died 40 years ago in a back alley in South Philadelphia, killed by a single punch that changed everything. Samuel reached up and straightened the crooked frame, his arthritic fingers gentle on the dusty glass. His reflection appeared in the protective covering, an old man's face superimposed over a young champion's body, past and present occupying the same space, separated by decades and regret. I'm sorry, he whispered to the photograph. I'm so sorry for what I let you become. He turned away, grabbed his jacket from the maintenance closet, and headed for the back door. The parking lot was empty except for his old Honda. The streetlights cast orange pools of illumination on the cracked asphalt. A cold November wind blew trash across the lot, the sound of plastic bags scratching against concrete. Samuel walked slowly toward his car, his entire body aching from the long day. His knees hurt, his back hurt, his hands hurt. Everything hurt. Getting old was a process of accumulating pain, both physical and otherwise, until pain became the baseline, the normal state of existence. He reached his car, fumbled with his keys, dropped them, bent down with difficulty to pick them up. That's when he noticed the man. Someone stood at the far end of the parking lot, near the alley where the dumpsters sat. A man wearing white robes that seemed to glow in the darkness, though that had to be a trick of the streetlights. The man didn't move, didn't call out, just stood there as if waiting. Samuel's first thought was that someone was lost, maybe confused. Philadelphia had its share of people who wandered the streets, some mentally ill, some homeless, some just drunk and disoriented. His second thought was that he should get in his car and leave. Nothing good happened in dark parking lots at 10 p.m., but something made him pause, something about the way the man stood, perfectly still, radiating a sense of patience that seemed to defy the cold wind and late hour. Samuel called out, his voice rough from disuse, "You okay over there? You need help." The man didn't respond, but he moved forward slightly, stepping into a pool of orange streetlight. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. The man appeared to be in his early 30s, with long dark hair and a full beard. His skin had an olive complexion, neither clearly white nor clearly brown, the kind of ambiguous ethnicity that could belong to many parts of the world. He wore simple robes, the kind you might see in a biblical movie, white with a red sash across his chest. His feet were bare despite the cold. But it was his eyes that stopped Samuel's heart. Even from 50 feet away, even in the dim orange streetlight, those eyes seemed to see everything. They looked at Samuel not with judgment but with recognition, as if they knew exactly who he was, what he had been, what he had become. "Samuel," the man said, his voice carrying clearly across the parking lot, despite being barely above a conversational volume. "We need to talk." Samuel's hands trembled. Nobody called him Samuel anymore. At work he was old man, or janitor, or simply ignored. At the grocery store, he was sir. At the Social Security office he was a number. But Samuel, his actual name spoken with familiarity, as if this stranger knew him personally, that was something he hadn't heard in years. "Do I know you?" Samuel asked, his voice shaking slightly. The man in robes smiled, a gentle expression that somehow made the cold parking lot feel warmer. "You've known me your whole life, you just stopped listening." He walked closer, his bare feet making no sound on the asphalt. As he approached, Samuel noticed details that made no logical sense. The man's white robes were perfectly clean despite the dirty urban environment. His feet showed no signs of dirt or cold despite being bare. And his presence carried a quality that Samuel couldn't quite name, something that made the air feel thicker, more substantial. "I've been watching you," the man said, stopping a few feet away. "I watched you in that gym today. I watched Marcus humiliate you. I watched you accept it, swallow your pride, bury your anger. I've been watching you do that for 15 years. Samuel's heart pounded. This was either a very elaborate prank, or he was experiencing some kind of mental break, or something impossible was happening. "Who are you?" Samuel whispered. The man reached into his robes and pulled out something that made Samuel's legs nearly buckle, a newspaper. A perfectly preserved newspaper from 1985, 40 years old, but looking like it had been printed yesterday. Samuel's knees gave out. He stumbled backward against his Honda, his hands gripping the cold metal of the car door to keep from falling completely. His heart hammered in his chest so hard he thought he might be having a heart attack. The newspaper in the stranger's hands seemed to glow under the streetlight, the 40-year-old photograph of his younger self, staring back at him like a ghost. "This isn't possible," Samuel breathed, his voice barely audible. "This isn't real. I'm having a stroke. Or I'm dreaming. Or I've finally lost my mind." Jesus stepped closer, his bare feet silent on the asphalt. He held the newspaper steady, not forcing it on Samuel but keeping it visible, undeniable. "You're not having a stroke, you're not dreaming, and your mind is clearer right now than it's been in 40 years. Samuel's breathing came in short gasps. 40 years of suppressed memories crashed against the walls he'd built in his mind, threatening to break through. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to regain control, trying to make sense of the impossible. "Look at me, Samuel," Jesus said gently. Samuel opened his eyes. In that moment, something shifted in his perception. The parking lot seemed to fade slightly, and he saw the man before him not just as a physical presence but as something more, something that existed in layers of reality he couldn't fully comprehend. The white robes seemed to contain light rather than reflect it. The red sash across his chest looked like it was woven from sunrise itself. "I know you," Samuel whispered, tears beginning to form in his eyes. I used to pray to you. Every night before a fight, every morning when I train, I used to thank you for my strength, for my speed, for my blessings. I remember, Jesus said, his voice carrying warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. You were faithful, you were humble, you used your gift to provide for your family, to be a positive example in your community. You never forgot where your talent came from. Then why? The question burst from Samuel's chest like a dam breaking. Why did you let it all fall apart? Why did you let me lose everything? Why did you abandon me when I needed you most? The anger surprised Samuel. He hadn't allowed himself to feel angry at God in decades. He'd buried it under layers of resignation and defeat. But now, standing in this dark parking lot with the impossible made manifest before him, the anger erupted with the force of 40 years of suppression. Jesus didn't flinch from the anger. Instead, his expression filled with compassion that made Samuel's chest ache. I never abandoned you, Samuel. You abandoned yourself. That's not fair, Samuel said, his voice cracking. I was defending my daughter. What was I supposed to do? Let those men hurt her. Tell me what happened that night, Jesus said. Tell me the whole truth, not the version you've told yourself to justify the guilt. The real truth. Samuel's hands trembled. The newspaper in Jesus's hands seemed to pulse with light. The parking lot around them grew quieter, as if the entire city was holding its breath, waiting for this confession. It was July 15th, 1985, Samuel began, his voice hollow with memory. 2 days after I retained my title for the 4th time, I was on top of the world, undefeated, making more money than I'd ever imagined. My daughter, Jasmine, she was 16, beautiful, smart, full of life. He paused, the memory becoming vivid, pulling him back through time. She'd gone to a party in South Philly with some friends. I'd told her to be home by midnight, but it got to be 1 a.m. then 2 a.m., and she wasn't home. My wife Angela, she was worried sick. I got in my car and drove to the neighborhood where the party was. Samuel's voice grew quieter, each word pulled from somewhere deep and painful. I found her in an alley behind a convenience store. 3 men had cornered her. They were older, maybe in their 30s. They'd been drinking. They had her pressed against a wall. She was crying, trying to push them away. One of them had his hand on her dress, trying to. He couldn't finish the sentence. Even after 40 years, the image was too clear, too devastating. I didn't think, Samuel continued. I just reacted. I charged into that alley like I was entering the ring. The first man didn't see me coming. I hit him with a right cross, all my power behind it, the same punch that had knocked out 4 championship opponents. He went down hard. The second man turned toward me, and I dropped him with a left hook. 2 punches, 2 men unconscious on the ground. Jesus listened in silence, his eyes never leaving Samuel's face. The third man, he ran, just took off down the alley and disappeared. Jasmine was crying, holding on to me. I held her, told her she was safe, told her I'd always protect her. I was her hero in that moment, her father, her champion. Samuel's voice broke, and tears began streaming down his weathered face. But the first man, the one I hit with the right cross, he didn't get up. The ambulance came 20 minutes later. He never regained consciousness, died 3 days later in the hospital. Traumatic brain injury. My punch, the same punch that won me championships, killed him. The words hung in the cold air like smoke. I was arrested, charged with manslaughter. My lawyers argued self-defense, defense of my daughter. The prosecutors painted me as a professional fighter, who used excessive force, who should have known better, who turned a rescue into a murder. The media had a field day. Lightning Sam kills man, with single punch. Champion's deadly right hand, from hero to killer in one night. Samuel wiped his face with shaking hands. The trial lasted 6 months. 6 months of hell. My sponsors dropped me. My title was stripped. My reputation destroyed. The boxing commission suspended me pending the trial outcome. Every day, photographers outside the courthouse. Every day, seeing that man's family crying in the front row. Every day, watching my own family fall apart. What was the verdict? Jesus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Not guilty, Samuel said bitterly. Self-defense, defense of another, justified use of force. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and acquitted me. I was free to go home, free to rebuild my life, free to box again. He laughed, a harsh sound without humor. But I wasn't free, not really. That man's face haunted me every night. His family's grief haunted me. The knowledge that my gift, the talent you gave me, had killed someone, that haunted me most of all. How could I step back into the ring knowing what these hands could do? How could I throw a punch for money and glory, knowing I'd taken a life? So you quit, Jesus said. I quit everything, Samuel confirmed. I refused all comeback offers, rejected every fight promotion. My marriage fell apart within a year. Angela couldn't handle my depression, my guilt, my complete shutdown. Jasmine, my daughter, she blamed herself, thought everything was her fault. She ran away from home at 17, and I didn't have the strength to chase her down, to fight for her. I was broken. Samuel slid down the side of his car until he was sitting on the cold asphalt, his back against the door, his legs stretched out in front of him. Jesus sat down beside him, the white robes pooling around him, somehow remaining perfectly clean, despite the dirty parking lot. I lost my house to debt, Samuel continued, staring straight ahead into the darkness. Lost my cars, my savings, everything. Started drinking for a while, trying to forget. Worked whatever jobs I could find. Dishwasher, day laborer, security guard. Nothing that required thinking because I couldn't think anymore. Couldn't feel. Just existed, day to day, trying to survive. Then 15 years ago, I saw an ad for a janitor position at Iron Temple, the same gym where I'd trained for my championship runs. I almost didn't apply. The thought of going back there, being in that place where I'd been somebody, where I'd been respected, going back as a janitor, it felt like torture. But you applied anyway, Jesus said. I needed the job, Samuel said simply. Pride doesn't pay rent, so I applied, and Derek hired me. I don't think he knew who I was, or maybe he knew but didn't care. Either way, I became invisible. Just another old man pushing a mop, and that felt right. That felt like the punishment I deserved. Jesus reached over and placed his hand on Samuel's shoulder. The touch was warm, radiating through Samuel's jacket, through his shirt, into his bones, chasing away a cold that had nothing to do with November weather. Samuel, look at me, Jesus said. Samuel turned his head, meeting those eyes that seemed to contain entire galaxies of understanding. That man you killed. His name was Robert Mitchell. He was 34 years old. He had a wife and 2 children. He worked construction. He had a drinking problem and a history of assault charges. That night, he and his friends had consumed a fifth of whiskey and were looking for trouble. Samuel's breath caught. How do you know his name? How do you know all that? Because I was there, Jesus said. I was in that alley. I was with Robert when he made his choices that night. I was with his friends. I was with Jasmine, and I was with you. Then why didn't you stop it? Samuel's voice broke. Why didn't you prevent the whole thing? Because human beings have free will, Jesus said gently. Robert chose to drink. He chose to corner a young girl. He chose violence. His friends chose to follow him. You chose to defend your daughter. Every person in that alley made choices, and choices have consequences. I killed him, Samuel said. That's the consequence that matters, is it? Jesus asked. Or is the consequence that you killed yourself? You took one tragic moment and used it to destroy 40 years of life. You took the guilt of one death and multiplied it into the death of your marriage, the loss of your daughter, the waste of your talent, the erasure of your identity. Robert Mitchell died once. You've been dying every day since. The words hit Samuel like physical blows. He wanted to argue, to defend his decades of penance, but the truth of it crashed over him like a wave. Robert Mitchell's death was a tragedy, Jesus continued, but it was not murder. You were defending your child. Any father would have done the same. The jury understood that. The law understood that. Even Robert's family, in time, came to understand that their husband and father had put himself in that situation. But I should have controlled my strength, Samuel protested weakly. And if you had held back, measured your force, what might have happened to Jasmine while you were being careful? Jesus asked. You did what you had to do. That's not a sin. What is a sin is what you did afterward. You abandoned the life I gave you. You buried the talent I blessed you with. You let guilt turn you into a ghost. I can't change the past, Samuel whispered. No, Jesus agreed. But you can change tomorrow, and that's why I'm here. He held up the newspaper again, the photograph of young Samuel in victory clear under the streetlight. This man, this champion, he's not dead. He's still inside you. Tomorrow when Marcus tries to use you as a punching bag, tries to humiliate you in front of everyone, you have a choice. You can let it happen, continue being invisible, continue punishing yourself, or you can remember who you are. I'm 68 years old, Samuel said. My body is broken, my hands have arthritis, my knees barely work, I can't fight anymore. Jesus smiled, and the expression transformed his face into something that radiated joy and power. Samuel, I healed the blind, made the paralyzed walk, raised the dead. Do you really think arthritis is beyond my ability? He placed his hand on Samuel's right hand, the hand that had won championships, the hand that had killed Robert Mitchell, the hand that now could barely grip a mop handle. Warmth flooded through Samuel's fingers, up his wrist, into his arm. The constant ache that had lived in his joints for years simply vanished. The stiffness disappeared, his fingers flexed with the same fluid strength they'd had 40 years ago. Samuel stared at his hand in shock, opening and closing his fist, feeling no pain, no resistance, just smooth, powerful movement. Jesus touched Samuel's knees, the same warmth, the same healing, the grinding pain that accompanied every step, every staircase, every morning when he got out of bed. Gone. Completely gone. Stand up, Jesus said. Samuel stood, and for the first time in decades, his body obeyed without protest. He felt light, strong, capable. The years seemed to fall away like dead skin. This is impossible, Samuel breathed. With humans, yes, Jesus said, standing beside him, but not with God. Samuel looked at his hands, flexed his legs, felt strength coursing through his body that he'd thought was lost forever. Tears streamed down his face, but they were different tears now. Not tears of grief or regret, but tears of overwhelming gratitude and wonder. Tomorrow, Jesus said, his voice taking on a tone of authority that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Marcus will challenge you. He will expect you to be weak, helpless, defeated. He will expect you to let him humiliate you. The entire gym will watch, expecting the same thing. What do you want me to do? Samuel asked, his voice steady now, strong. I want you to show them the truth, Jesus said. I want you to step into that ring and remind everyone, including yourself, who Lightning Sam Washington really is. Not to hurt Marcus, not for revenge, but to teach him humility, to teach everyone watching that they should never judge a person by their current circumstances, that every person has value, has dignity, has a story worth respecting. Samuel's heart pounded with something he hadn't felt in 40 years, anticipation, not fear, not dread, but the electric excitement of a challenge, a purpose. Jesus placed his hand over Samuel's heart. It's all still here. Every combination you ever learned, every defense, every footwork pattern. Your body remembers even if your mind has forgotten. Trust yourself, trust me, and when you step into that ring tomorrow, you won't be alone. The parking lot seemed to brighten slightly, though no new lights had turned on. The cold November wind stopped blowing. Everything became still, quiet, sacred. There's more, Jesus said, pulling something else from his robes. A photograph, old and worn. He handed it to Samuel. Samuel took the photo with trembling hands. It showed a young woman, maybe in her early 40s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She stood in front of a small church, holding the hand of a teenage girl who looked remarkably like Jasmine had looked at that age. Your daughter, Jesus said softly. Jasmine, she's alive, she's healthy. She found faith, found healing. She works as a counselor now, helping young women who've experienced trauma. She's been sober for 12 years. She's married to a good man. That girl in the photograph is your granddaughter, Maya. She's 14 years old. Samuel's legs nearly gave out again. His daughter, his Jasmine, alive, healthy, the one person in his life he'd failed most completely. Where is she? Samuel's voice was barely a whisper. Baltimore, Jesus said. 2 hours north. She thinks you're dead. After years of not responding to her attempts to reconnect, she eventually assumed you died. She mourned you. She forgave you. She moved on. I have to see her, Samuel said desperately. After tomorrow, Jesus said firmly. First you have something to finish. You have to remember who you are. You have to stand up for yourself. Then after you've reclaimed your dignity, After you've proven to yourself that Samuel Washington still exists, then you can go to your daughter. Then you can begin truly living again." Samuel looked at the photograph of his daughter and granddaughter, his heart aching with longing and hope. A family he'd lost. The possibility of redemption. "Will she forgive me?" Samuel asked. "She already has," Jesus said. "But now you need to forgive yourself. That's what tomorrow is really about." Jesus took back the photograph and newspaper, both items disappearing into his robes. He placed both hands on Samuel's shoulders, looking directly into his eyes. "Tomorrow at 3 p.m., Marcus will call you into that ring. You will accept his challenge. You will show him and everyone watching that age does not diminish worth, that current circumstances do not define identity, that every person deserves respect. You will not hurt him, but you will humble him. You will teach him a lesson he desperately needs to learn." Samuel felt something shift inside his chest, like a lock turning, a door opening, light flooding into a room that had been dark for decades. "I don't know if I can do this," Samuel admitted. "You can," Jesus said, "with absolute certainty, because I will be with you. In that ring tomorrow, you won't be alone. Even when you stop talking to me, even when you stop believing I was listening, I was there. In every painful morning, in every humiliation, in every moment you felt invisible, I saw you. I've always seen you." The words broke something fundamental in Samuel's heart. All the years of loneliness, all the accumulated grief, all the self-imposed exile from love and connection. It cracked like ice under spring sun. Samuel fell to his knees on the cold asphalt and wept. Not quiet tears but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere he'd locked away for 40 years. He wept for Robert Mitchell. He wept for Jasmine. He wept for all the wasted years, the unnecessary suffering, the refusal to forgive himself. Jesus knelt beside him, holding him as he cried, saying nothing, just present, just there, radiating compassion that required no words. Eventually, the tears slowed. Samuel looked up at Jesus through blurred vision. "Thank you," Samuel whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I never give up on anyone," Jesus said. "That's not who I am." He helped Samuel to his feet. The parking lot had returned to normal, the wind blowing again, distant traffic audible, but something fundamental had changed. The world looked different to Samuel. He felt alive in a way he hadn't experienced in decades. "Tomorrow will be difficult," Jesus said. "Marcus will be angry when he realizes you're not an easy target. Some people will be shocked. You'll face resistance." "I don't care," Samuel said, and he meant it. "I'm done being invisible. I'm done apologizing for existing. I'm done letting other people's judgment define me." Jesus smiled. "That's the Samuel I remember. That's the champion I blessed. That's the man I've been waiting 40 years to see again." He began walking backward, toward the shadows at the edge of the parking lot, his white robes gradually fading into the darkness. "Wait," Samuel called out. "Will I see you again?" Jesus' voice came from the shadows already distant. "Tomorrow in the ring, I'll be in your corner, and after, when you see your daughter, I'll be there too. I'm always there, Samuel. You just have to remember to look." And then he was gone, vanished into the night as mysteriously as he'd appeared, leaving Samuel standing alone in the parking lot, his body healed, his heart transformed, his purpose renewed. Samuel looked at his hands again, flexing his fingers, feeling the strength. He bounced on his toes, testing his knees. They responded perfectly. He threw a shadow punch, then another, his body remembering the movements. He laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the empty parking lot. An old man laughing alone in the darkness, but not feeling old anymore, not feeling alone anymore. Tomorrow Marcus Williams was going to learn an important lesson. Tomorrow everyone at Iron Temple was going to discover that Samuel Washington, the invisible janitor, was actually Lightning Sam, the forgotten champion. Tomorrow everything changed. Samuel drove home that night with hands that no longer trembled, knees that no longer ached, and a heart that no longer carried the crushing weight of 40 years of guilt. His small studio apartment awaited him, the same 400 square feet he'd occupied for over a decade. But tonight it felt different. It felt temporary. It felt like the last night of an old life before a new one began. He didn't sleep. How could he? His mind raced through combinations, defensive patterns, footwork sequences he hadn't thought about in decades. At 2 a.m. he found himself doing push-ups on his worn carpet, surprised when he reached 75 without strain. At 3 a.m. he stood in front of his bathroom mirror throwing jabs and crosses, watching his reflection transform from an old janitor into something else entirely. Lightning Sam was waking up after a 40-year sleep. His alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. as usual. Samuel showered, dressed in his work clothes, the dark blue pants and gray polo shirt with Iron Temple staff embroidered on the chest, and drove through the dark Philadelphia streets to the gym. But he was not the same man who had made this drive yesterday morning. Everything looked different now. The street lights seemed brighter, the buildings seemed less oppressive, the world had color again. He unlocked the back door of Iron Temple at exactly 5:45 a.m., just as he had for 15 years, but his movements had changed. Where before he shuffled, now he walked with purpose. Where before his shoulders hunched forward in defeat, now they sat back and square. Where before he kept his eyes on the ground, now he looked straight ahead. Samuel began his morning routine, but his mind was elsewhere. He swept the floors while visualizing the ring. He mopped while mentally rehearsing combinations. He wiped down equipment while remembering the feel of leather gloves, the smell of the canvas, the sound of the crowd. At 6:30 a.m. Derek arrived in his black Mercedes SUV, already on his phone, already shouting about sponsorship deals. He walked past Samuel without acknowledgement, as he had for 15 years. Samuel watched him go and smiled. By tonight Derek would know his name. They all would. The trainers arrived next. Big Tommy, Carlos, Jennifer. They nodded at Samuel with the same polite disinterest they always showed. Just the janitor. Just the furniture. Just part of the background. At 8 a.m. Marcus Williams rolled into the parking lot in his bright red Dodge Challenger, music thumping loud enough to rattle windows. He strutted into the gym with his usual entourage, his manager, his personal trainer, two friends who existed only to laugh at his jokes and carry his bags. "Yo, old man," Marcus called out when he spotted Samuel near the heavy bags. "You ready for this afternoon? 3 o'clock, you and me in the ring. I'm gonna make you famous. Everyone's gonna see what happens when you don't show proper respect." His entourage laughed on cue. Several nearby fighters smirked. Derek, standing at the front desk going through paperwork, said nothing. Samuel stopped his work. He looked up, meeting Marcus's eyes directly for the first time in the 8 months they'd shared this space, and he smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a submissive smile, but a calm, knowing smile. The smile of a man holding pocket aces. The smile of a champion who'd just been challenged by someone completely unprepared for what was coming. "I'll be there," Samuel said, his voice clear and strong. 3 p.m. In the ring. Wouldn't miss it for anything in the world. Something in his tone made Marcus's confident expression flicker for just a moment. The young fighter's eyes narrowed, sensing something different but unable to identify what had changed about the old janitor. "You better be," Marcus said, recovering his bravado. "I'm gonna teach you a lesson you won't forget. Gonna show everyone what happens to people who don't know their place." "Yes," Samuel said quietly, his smile widening. "Everyone's going to learn something today." "You're absolutely right about that." Marcus stared at him for another moment, an uncomfortable feeling growing in his chest that he couldn't name. Then he turned away, heading toward the locker room, his entourage following, their laughter slightly forced now. Samuel returned to his work, but inside electricity coursed through his veins. Hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. He cleaned, organized, stayed invisible, but his mind was in the ring, preparing for war. Word spread through the gym about Marcus's planned training session with the janitor. Some fighters made plans to leave before 3 p.m., not wanting to witness whatever humiliation Marcus had planned. Others decided to stay, morbid curiosity overriding their discomfort. A few younger boxers started a betting pool on how long the old man would last before Marcus knocked him down. Around noon, Derek called Marcus into his office, their voices carried through the gym. "What's this about you using Samuel as a punching bag?" Derek's voice held concern about liability, not humanity. "Just having some fun, boss," Marcus responded. "Old man needs to learn his place. Besides, he doesn't have any family. Nobody would even notice if he disappeared." Their laughter echoed from the office. Samuel, mopping the hallway outside, heard every word. The old Samuel would have felt despair. The new Samuel felt only anticipation. At 2:30 p.m. Samuel put away his cleaning supplies. He went to the small staff locker room and opened his locker. From the back, Hidden behind his street clothes, he pulled out something he'd kept for 15 years but never thought he'd wear again. Boxing shorts. Red with white trim. The same colors he'd worn in his championship fights. They still fit, though his body had changed shape over the decades. He pulled on a white t-shirt and laced up a pair of training shoes he'd bought that morning during his lunch break with money he'd been saving for groceries. He looked at himself in the cracked mirror, an old man in boxing gear. It could have been ridiculous, but Samuel saw something else. He saw a warrior preparing for battle. He saw a champion coming home. At 2:55 p.m., Samuel walked out of the locker room and into the main gym. The effect was immediate and total. Every conversation stopped. Every punch paused mid-swing. Every jump rope froze in mid-rotation. The entire gym turned to stare at the janitor in boxing gear, walking toward the ring with a confidence they'd never seen, with a presence they'd never imagined. Marcus stood in the center ring, already wearing his gloves, laughing about something with Big Tommy. He looked toward the locker room, saw Samuel approaching, and his laughter died in his throat. "What the hell is this?" Marcus called out, but his voice carried uncertainty now. "Old man thinks he's a real fighter. This is gonna be even better than I thought." But his eyes told a different story, because Samuel didn't look like a victim anymore. He looked like he belonged in this gym. He looked dangerous. Samuel climbed through the ropes with fluid, practiced movements. He stood in the opposite corner, stretching slightly, his body loose and ready. The gym had filled with spectators now. Every fighter, every trainer, every staff member had gathered around the ring. Phones were out, recording. This would be gym legend, one way or another. Derek emerged from his office, drawn by the unusual energy. He stood at ringside, his expression confused. "Samuel, you don't have to do this." Marcus was just joking around. "I'm not joking," Samuel said calmly, "and neither is he. So let's finish this." Big Tommy approached the ring, looking concerned. "Derek, I don't know if we should. Let them go one round," Derek decided. "If the old man wants to learn a lesson, let him. Maybe then he'll know his place." Marcus strutted across the ring, his gloves up, his expression predatory. "You really want to do this, old man? I'm gonna break you. I'm gonna put you in the hospital." Samuel met his eyes, and for the first time, Marcus saw something in those old eyes that made his stomach clench with unexpected fear, a coldness, a certainty, a knowing. "Try," Samuel said simply. Big Tommy reluctantly helped Samuel with his gloves, wrapping his hands first, then lacing up a pair of old training gloves from the gym's equipment closet. As he worked, he whispered, "You can still walk away. Nobody would blame you." "I'm exactly where I need to be," Samuel replied. The gym fell silent. Someone rang the bell. Marcus moved forward immediately, his confidence returning as he bounced on his toes, his gloves up, ready to teach this old fool the lesson of his life. He threw a lazy jab, just to test the distance, to see how slow the old man really was. Samuel's head moved 6 inches to the left. The jab passed through empty air. Marcus frowned, threw another jab, faster this time. Samuel slipped it effortlessly, his body remembering 40 years of defensive training, his feet positioning perfectly without conscious thought. "Hold still, old man," Marcus growled, throwing a combination now. Jab, jab, right cross. Samuel slipped the first jab, ducked under the second, and the right cross sailed over his head by a foot. He didn't throw back, just defended, his movements smooth, economical, professional. The crowd around the ring began murmuring. This wasn't what they'd expected. The old janitor was making Marcus look bad, making him miss everything. Marcus's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He pressed forward, throwing harder now, faster, real punches meant to hurt. A left hook aimed at Samuel's head, a right uppercut targeting his body, a overhand right with all his power. Samuel moved like smoke. Every punch missed. He barely seemed to move, just small adjustments of his head, his shoulders, his feet, but Marcus couldn't touch him. It was like trying to hit a ghost. "What the hell?" Marcus breathed, frustration building. "Stand still and fight." "You first," Samuel said calmly. The gym erupted. Fighters were standing now, pressing against the ring, their expressions shocked. The old janitor wasn't just defending. He was making the gym's top prospect look like an amateur. Marcus, his pride wounded, abandoned technique and threw a wild haymaker, putting all his 220 pounds behind it, aiming for Samuel's jaw with the kind of punch that could end a career. Samuel didn't slip this one. He stepped inside it so close that Marcus's arm passed behind his head, and then Samuel countered for the first time. It was just a jab. Nothing fancy, a simple textbook jab, but it landed on Marcus's nose with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, snapping his head back, making his eyes water instantly. The sound echoed through the gym like a gunshot. Marcus stumbled backward, shocked, his gloves coming up to his face. He'd been hit before, thousands of times in sparring, but never like this, never with such perfect timing, such absolute control. What he started to say, but Samuel was already pressing forward. For the first time in the fight, Samuel went on offense. He moved forward with a footwork pattern that looked like poetry, his feet gliding across the canvas in the same patterns he drilled 10,000 times in his prime. Jab, jab, left hook to the body, right cross upstairs. Every punch landed clean, not with devastating power. Samuel was controlling his strength, teaching rather than hurting, but with the kind of precision that announced one undeniable truth: he could hurt Marcus any time he wanted. Marcus tried to fight back, throwing combinations, using all his youth and strength and modern training, but it was useless. Samuel was levels above him. Decades of experience showed in every movement, every counter, every defensive slip that made Marcus's best punches look childish. The round was supposed to be 3 minutes. After 90 seconds, Big Tommy threw in the towel. The bell rang. The fight was over. The gym stood in absolute silence. Everyone stared at Samuel, standing calm and unbothered in the center of the ring, not even breathing hard, while Marcus leaned against the ropes, his face red, his nose bleeding, his pride shattered. Then someone started clapping, slowly at first. Jennifer, one of the trainers, then Carlos joined her, then one of the younger fighters, then another. Within seconds the entire gym erupted in applause, the sound building into a thunderous ovation. Samuel turned slowly, looking at all the faces around the ring, seeing respect where there had only been dismissal before, seeing recognition where there had only been invisibility. Derek stood at ringside, his mouth hanging open, his phone in his hand forgotten. "Who are you?" he whispered. Samuel pulled off his gloves and handed them to Big Tommy. Then he walked to the corner of the gym, to that dusty, crooked photograph that had hung there for 40 years. He straightened it carefully, his fingers gentle on the frame. "Lightning Sam Washington," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent gym. "East Coast heavyweight champion, 1982 through 1985, 4 title defenses, never lost in the ring. That's who I am. That's who I've always been." The gym erupted again, but this time with shocked exclamations, with people pulling out their phones to search his name, with older trainers suddenly recognizing the face they'd seen in that photograph, connecting it finally to the old janitor they'd ignored for 15 years. "Oh my God," someone said. "It's really him. It's Lightning Sam. I watched his fights on TV." Another fighter said. "He was incredible. Everyone thought he'd be the next champion." Marcus had climbed out of the ring, his face a mixture of humiliation and dawning understanding. He approached Samuel slowly, his entourage hanging back, silent for the first time. "You're really him?" Marcus asked, his voice small. "You're really Lightning Sam?" "I am," Samuel confirmed. "Why didn't you tell anyone? Why did you let me treat you like that? Why did you work as a janitor when you were a champion?" Samuel looked at him for a long moment. "Because I forgot who I was. Because I let one mistake, one tragic moment define my entire existence. Because I thought I deserved to be invisible, to be punished, to disappear. But someone reminded me last night that I'm more than my worst moment, that I still have value, that I still matter." He placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. The young fighter flinched slightly, then held still. "You're talented," Samuel said. "You're strong, fast, skilled. You could be great. But talent without character is nothing. Strength without respect is weakness. You treated me like garbage because you thought I was beneath you. You judged my worth by my job, by my age, by my appearance, and you were wrong." Tears were forming in Marcus's eyes now. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was a fool. I was cruel. I fail." "You were young," Samuel interrupted gently. "Young and arrogant and blind. But you can change. You can learn. That's why we fought today. Not for revenge, not to hurt you, but to teach you that every person you meet deserves respect. Every person has a story. Every person matters, whether they're a champion or a janitor or anything in between. Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face now. I understand. I'm sorry. I'll do better. I promise I'll do better. Samuel pulled him into a hug, and Marcus sobbed against his shoulder like a child, all his bravado stripped away, all his arrogance shattered, leaving only a young man who'd just learned the most important lesson of his life. The gym watched in silence, witnessing not just a fight's aftermath, but a moment of transformation, of redemption, of grace. Then Derek approached, his expression serious. Samuel, I owe you an apology. I should have recognized you. I should have stopped Marcus's behavior. I should have valued me regardless of who I was, Samuel said quietly. But I forgive you. I forgive all of you. Because I finally learned to forgive myself. He looked around the gym at all the faces watching him and felt something he hadn't experienced in 40 years, belonging. Not because he'd proven himself in the ring, not because they finally knew his name, but because he'd remembered his own worth. I quit, Samuel said simply. Derek's eyes widened. What? No, Samuel, you don't have to quit. Stay, train our fighters, share your knowledge. I'll pay you more, I'll pay you more. I'm not quitting because I'm angry. Samuel interrupted. I'm quitting because I have somewhere more important to be, someone I need to see, a family I need to find. He walked toward the locker room, and as he did, something made him pause. He felt a presence, warm and familiar. He turned and looked at the empty corner of the gym, near the equipment storage. A man stood there, wearing simple white robes with a red sash, Jesus, visible only to Samuel, watching with a smile that radiated pride and love. He nodded once, then faded from view. But Samuel felt his presence remain, felt it settle into his heart like a promise. I'm always with you. In the locker room, Samuel changed back into his street clothes. He cleaned out his locker, taking only what was his. When he emerged, several fighters approached him. Mr. Washington, would you train me? One asked. Could you show me that counter you used? Another requested. Can I get your autograph? A young amateur asked shyly. Samuel smiled at all of them. I'm leaving Philadelphia today, but I'll tell you what I learned. Be humble. Treat everyone with respect. Never judge someone by their circumstances. Work hard. Have faith. And remember that your worth isn't determined by your wins or losses, but by how you treat people when nobody's watching. He shook hands with each of them, offered encouragement to those who asked, signed a few autographs. Then he walked toward the exit, toward his old Honda waiting in the parking lot, toward the beginning of a new life. Marcus caught him at the door. Where are you going? Baltimore, Samuel said. To see my daughter. To meet my granddaughter. To stop running from the past and start living in the present. Will I see you again? Samuel considered the question. Maybe, if you keep training, keep improving, keep learning humility, maybe our paths will cross again. But regardless, I'll be watching your career, I'll be praying for you, and I'll be hoping you remember today's lesson. Marcus hugged him again, harder this time. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for teaching me. Thank Jesus, Samuel said. He's the one who never gives up on anyone. He walked out into the November afternoon, the sun bright in a clear sky, warming his face. His Honda waited in the parking lot, old and worn but ready for one more journey. Samuel climbed in, started the engine, and pulled out onto the street. As he drove through Philadelphia toward the highway that would take him to Baltimore, toward his daughter, toward redemption and reunion, Samuel felt peace settle into his bones. The guilt that had weighed on him for 40 years had finally lifted. The shame that had made him invisible had dissolved. The anger at God that had poisoned his faith had been replaced with gratitude and trust. He turned on the radio. An oldies station was playing Eye of the Tiger, and this time Samuel didn't turn it off. He turned it up, letting the music fill the car, letting himself remember what it felt like to be strong, to be powerful, to be alive. His hands on the steering wheel were steady. No trembling, no arthritis, healed. His knees bent smoothly as he pressed the pedals. No grinding, no pain. Restored. His heart beat strongly in his chest, no longer heavy with guilt and regret, but light with hope and purpose. Transformed. The highway stretched out before him, leading north, leading home, leading toward a daughter who thought he was dead, toward a granddaughter he'd never met, toward a future he'd thought was impossible. But nothing was impossible. Jesus had proven that in a parking lot last night. Samuel had proven it in a boxing ring this afternoon, and he would prove it again when he knocked on his daughter's door and showed her that redemption was real, that second chances existed, that love could survive even 40 years of separation. As he merged onto I-95 North, Samuel said a prayer, not the desperate, guilty prayers of his past, but a prayer of thanksgiving, of joy, of faith restored. "Thank you," he said aloud, his voice strong. "Thank you for not giving up on me when I gave up on myself. Thank you for sending your son to remind me who I am. Thank you for healing my body, my heart, my soul. Thank you for my daughter, my granddaughter, my second chance. I won't waste it. I promise I won't waste it." He felt a warmth in his chest, a presence that needed no physical form. Jesus was with him, just as he'd promised, in the car on this journey, in the difficult conversation that awaited in Baltimore, in all the days to come. 2 hours later, as the sun began to set, Samuel pulled up in front of a small house in a quiet Baltimore neighborhood. The address matched the one from his research, the home where Jasmine lived with her husband and daughter. He sat in his car for a moment, his heart pounding. What would he say? How would he explain 40 years of absence? Would she even open the door for him? Then he remembered Jesus' words, "She already forgave you, but you need to forgive yourself." Samuel got out of the car and walked up the path to the front door. His legs were steady, his hands didn't shake. He rang the doorbell. Footsteps inside. The door opened. A woman stood there, in her 50s, now but still beautiful, still unmistakably his Jasmine. Her eyes widened, her hand flew to her mouth. Tears instantly flooded her eyes. "Dad?" she whispered. "Daddy?" "Hi baby girl," Samuel said, his own voice cracking. "I'm sorry I'm late, but I'm here now. If you'll have me, I'm here now." Jasmine threw herself into his arms, sobbing, holding him tight, repeating, "Daddy, Daddy," over and over like a prayer, like a song, like the most beautiful word in the world. They stood in the doorway, father and daughter reunited. 40 years of separation collapsing into one perfect moment of forgiveness and love. Behind them, the sun set over Baltimore, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. And somewhere, perhaps in that golden light, perhaps in the warmth that surrounded the embracing father and daughter, perhaps in the joy that filled the air like music, Jesus smiled, because this was why he came. Not for the strong who needed nothing, not for the righteous who had no sins, but for the broken, the lost, the guilty, the forgotten. For people like Samuel Washington, who needed to be reminded that they mattered, that they were loved, that redemption was always possible. A teenage girl appeared in the doorway behind Jasmine. "Mom, who's?" She stopped, seeing the old man holding her mother, seeing her mother cry tears of joy, sensing that something miraculous was happening. "Maya," Jasmine said, pulling back from Samuel just enough to gesture to her daughter. "Come here, sweetheart. I want you to meet someone very important. This is your grandfather. This is my father." Maya approached slowly, uncertainty in her young face. Samuel looked at her and saw Jasmine at that age, saw the same eyes, the same gentle spirit, his granddaughter, his family, his second chance. "Hi Maya," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so happy to meet you. I'm so sorry it took me this long." Maya studied him for a moment, then smiled, and in that smile, Samuel saw acceptance, saw grace, saw the same forgiveness her mother had just shown. "Welcome home, Grandpa," Maya said simply, and in that moment, standing on the doorstep of his daughter's home, surrounded by family he thought he'd lost forever, Samuel Washington finally understood what Jesus had been trying to teach him for 40 years. You are never too broken to be healed. You are never too lost to be found. You are never too far gone to come home, and you are never ever forgotten by the one who loves you most. Lightning Sam Washington, the forgotten champion, had finally remembered who he was, not just a boxer, not just a janitor, but a child of God, a beloved son, a person of infinite worth. And that was the greatest victory of all. The end. Sometimes the people we overlook carry the most powerful stories. Samuel spent 15 years invisible, cleaning floors where he once stood as a champion. But here's what I've learned. God never forgets who we really are, even when we forget ourselves. Watch what happens when Jesus reminds a broken man of his true identity. Have you ever felt invisible, like your past accomplishments meant nothing? Samuel lived that nightmare for 40 years, but one parking lot encounter changed everything. Stay with me, because what happens in that boxing ring will give you chills. Samuel's story proves that it's never too late for redemption. Jesus doesn't see us as janitors or champions, failures or winners. He sees us as his children, always worth saving, always worth remembering. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt forgotten or invisible? Have you experienced a moment where God reminded you of your true worth? Drop your story in the comments below. Your testimony might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. What struck me most about Samuel's journey wasn't just the moment he stepped back into that ring after 40 years. It was the weight he carried all those years, punishing himself for one tragic night when he was only trying to protect his daughter. How many of us do the same thing? We let one mistake, one failure, one moment of weakness define our entire existence. We forget that God's grace is bigger than our worst day. Samuel thought he deserved to be invisible, to suffer in silence, to never feel joy again. But Jesus had been waiting for him all along, ready to heal not just his arthritis but his broken spirit. That's the real miracle here. Not that an old man could still fight, but that God never stopped loving him through 40 years of self-imposed exile. If you're carrying guilt from your past, if you think you've fallen too far to be redeemed, Samuel's story is for you. It's never too late to come home.